Hello, Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, Cameron Parish has the second smallest population in the state, but was packed with dignitaries when the president dropped by. Not for the sunshine and the beach, but to shed light on the natural gas industry. We'll talk about the president's trip, including a stop in Metairie to add energy to his campaign chest. We'll also look at the business impact of the Lafitte Greenway and at the debate over tax incentives for economic development. The New Orleans City Council took a stand on short-term rentals. We'll look at that as well as that group's performance in its first year. And if success in sports is sometimes affected by the bounce of a ball, the Pelicans again had incredible luck with the drop of the ping pong ball. At the table for us are tonight's Informed Sources: Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Tyler Bridges, reporter, The New Orleans Advocate; Kathy Finn, freelance journalist and business columnist for New Orleans Magazine; and Kevin Litton, reporter, NOLA.com, the Times-Picayune. And we're going to go over to Kevin first and try to make some sense out of these short-term rental rules. I mean, I'm thoroughly confused, but now what are they looking like?
Well, day one, yesterday was really the big complicated day of setting up the framework. So one way to think about this is that you need to get that framework in place, and then you can start moving some of the things around in it. So I'll go over a couple of things that are like the big rules. One is a big one, homestead exemption, and people have been really upset about people that don't live in these houses and who are investing, and it drives up the cost of the houses in the community, and it's really been hit hard in the Bywater and the Marigny. So the council has in place now this exemption or the homestead exemption rule, which basically says you got to live in it, and if you have a double, so if you have another vacant piece on the other side, you can rent that out, and then if you have a couple other pieces on your property, you can do up to 3. And then there's some bedroom limits there. Then everything else is in the commercial districts. Commercial districts are going to have a bunch of different types. Some of them can be like large buildings. Some of them can be single pieces of property. A lot of that's going to be done in the central business district. So when I talk about that framework, the big thing that they have not figured out is, are they going to do a cap? So let's say you built a 200 unit building, apartment building. That building right now, as it stands, could be 100% short-term rental. But they intended this to be an apartment building so that people who live and work downtown could, basically live life downtown, right? That's really hard to do right now. So do we need to have a cap on that? And do we need to have affordable housing in those buildings? And one of the reasons the affordable housing piece is so important is that if they're going to do large buildings in the future and they want to be able to get short-term rentals in those buildings, sometimes they use that to finance it so that they can say, look, we're going to be able to make more money on this piece of the property, right? So the city council right now is trying to figure out, in order to get this whole thing to work, should we put a cap on the short-term rentals, make sure that other people can live there, and then also make it accessible to people who are lower incomes. And a huge piece of that is that when you're looking at the job centers, that's where a lot of these short-term rentals are situated, and that's where all the commercial zones are situated. Well, if you don't have people who can live near the job centers, then it just makes it more and more difficult for people to get into work, commute to work, even just the lower paying jobs. It's much harder for them to find those people.
So, okay. When the rules were passed by the previous council, a couple of years or so ago, people were able to rent out their whole home if they owned a home without having that homestead exemption, right? That's what it was before. And they could rent it out for, I believe it was 90 days per year.
Which was like almost unenforceable.
Unenforceable,
I don't know of any enforcement effort on that.
And so we saw a lot of change. A lot of people going in, speculators going in, buying these properties, renovating them, and then putting them on the market. And that's what caused a lot of neighborhoods to say, wait a minute, this is really impacting our neighborhoods. But still, those people made those purchases under those rules that existed at that time. What happens with that?
So the way that it got set up in the beginning was that they realized that they might need to revisit these, so they called them temporary licenses. And so they wanted to make it very clear that, look, this is not a permanent license. Once you get this license on this house, you're not going to hold it forever. So now there's been some talk, and that's why I emphasize that framework, because once they passed what they did yesterday, it has 90 days to become ordinance. So they're supposed to get a study back on the affordable housing. They're supposed to get some other information back on how those caps on larger buildings should look. Now, could they look at maybe grandfathering in people that didn't have that before? I mean, technically, that's something that you probably could add once you go and make the ordinance, because there's a flexible time period here. What they really needed to get done was to say, look, these are the rules. Let's give some certainty, especially to developers. Developers are really the ones that are struggling with this the most, because they're looking at large pieces of property downtown. Charity Hospital is one of them. There's a lot of property around Charity that could be developed, and those developers need to know, could short-term rentals be part of the mix, and do we want to do affordable housing as part of it as well?
And are these the rules that are the rules? You know,
These
that are going to stay and not change in another 18 months.
Yeah.
Tyler?
Yeah, I've been in Baton Rouge, and as part of the mayor's infrastructure plan, as Kevin knows, the legislature is getting ready to approve or authorize an election that would be held in October in Orleans Parish that would increase the tax on Airbnb and short-term rentals by up to 6.75 percentage points. So that will be coming in October, and that money is supposed to go for the mayor's infrastructure plan. And if the council limits or restricts the amount of short-term rentals in the city, the amount of money from that short-term rental tax increase would be less than what the mayor has been expecting.
So there'll be less for infrastructure, but another thing to point out about this that I thought was really interesting is that once the mayor advanced this package, it started putting pressure on the City Council to do more for affordable housing, because one of the things that they have on now is there's $1 a night that goes into the Neighborhood Housing Improvement Fund, which subsidizes affordable housing. They thought at the beginning of this process, we can increase that fee to like $8 a night, $9 a night. Let's generate, instead of, it's like $650,000 a year from short-term rentals for that fund, maybe we could do $20 million. Well, once you increase the tax that he mentioned, that tax is the same as the hotel tax. So then if during this 90-day process they add that fee on, then all of a sudden short-term rental owners are like, now you're taxing us even more than hotels.
Yeah.
So you make us less competitive and you're favoring the hotels. Why do you want to favor one over the other?
So there's still a considerable amount of stuff that needs to be considered yet. It's not all final. Okay.
That's right.
Thanks a lot, Kevin. Tyler, over to you. We had a visit to Louisiana by our president, Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And he went here in this New Orleans metro area. He also went western Louisiana, Lake Charles area. Let's talk about his visit first to Metairie. How'd it go?
Yeah, he arrived Tuesday afternoon just before 5 o'clock on Air Force One, and came down the steps and shook hands with some folks, and then he got in what they call the Beast, the big limousine, bulletproof limousine, and drove to the home in Old Metairie of developer and businessman Joe Canizero. And Canizero is a longtime major donor for the Republican Party in Louisiana. In 2016, he was co-finance chair for Louisiana along with Boise Bollinger, and Boise was the other guy who co-hosted the event at Canizero's house the other night. And donors could give $2,800. They could give $30,000. With that, you get a picture with the president. And then 20 people gave $100,000 apiece, and they got to participate in a roundtable discussion with the president. And in all, the president's reelection effort raised $4 million.
The round table wasn't free?
And, wait, I want to know, what did the 2,800 buy you?
You got to be in the same room with the president.
And so how big a group was this? It was at Mr. Canizero's house,
Yeah,
right?
they did a big tent outside. There was about 225, 250 people, and both Boise Bollinger and Joe Canizero told me that it was a lot of people really wanted to go to the event, and it was a great event. I talked to some people that said the president was, in their view, very charming.
Well, he was certainly among supporters, and among fans, they feel that the president has done great things.
Yeah, well, like him or not, the president is very effective at delivering a message, and especially with this audience, he really connected.
And so before Metairie, he actually he flew into the Lake Charles area. And what was that for?
Yeah, he flew into Lake Charles, and then he went to the major metropolis of Hackberry, where Sempra Energy is. It's a natural, liquid natural gas. But let me defer here to Kathy, because she knows more about that than I do.
Oh, well, I don't know more about his visit to Cameron Parish, but I found it ironic that he went to a natural gas facility under the circumstances, because this is an exporting facility, liquefied natural gas that they're exporting. One of the major buyers of liquefied natural gas is China. And here we are starting, or in the midst of a potential trade war with China. If that escalates, there's a good possibility that these plants could be hurt. They lose their major buyer. In fact, Reuters reported yesterday that those plants are already looking for other buyers in the event that they lose China.
Yes.
or that it becomes, not financially feasible.
Well, of course, from what I read, like in your coverage, Tyler, is that the president was touting the fact that this is going to mean construction jobs and also then, which are temporary, and then full-time jobs, so several hundred full-time jobs.
They do create construction jobs. They don't create many full-time jobs once they're in operation because it's now so
Automated.
capital intensive. And then there's another interesting issue, and I think Kathy's going to talk about this a little later, which is so many of these big companies don't pay any property taxes because of Louisiana's traditional, very generous industrial tax exemptions in SEMPRA. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kathy. SEMPRA is one of these companies that's barely been paying any property taxes, and there's a group in Baton Rouge, Together Louisiana, that's been highlighting this issue, and there's bills right now in the legislature to go against what Governor John Bel Edwards has done, which is to restrict some of these tax breaks for property taxes and go back to, the extraordinarily generous system.
Well, back to the president, though, while he was there in that area, in the Lake Charles area generally, he made a promise that I guess if he's reelected again, he's going to replace a bridge over Calcasieu River and I-10, which is something that they really need.
That bridge is really needs to be repaired, but it's $500 million. And it was his biggest applause line. But I have to say, I noted that would the people at Calcasieu or in the crowd there in Cameron Parish, would they have applauded if the president had said, yeah, but you're going to have to pay higher gas taxes to help repair that bridge? Instead, it was, I think what happens often in Louisiana is people love to have someone else put up the money to solve their problems so they don't have to pay higher taxes.
But
one side note, I would just note that we are in an election year here, and it's interesting, I think, to see Trump's popularity in a state like this when all the people who are running for re-election want to get in that photo with the president and want to be seen alongside that president. I mean, there's a real powerful visual to that when Trump visits the state, and I think it probably played out yesterday.
I was going to say that in that part of the state, bridges are a popular or powerful symbol because there's a lot of bridges. I mean, this is all swampland and waterland and all that. And so when you talk about bridges, people will listen.
Well, it seemed like a lot of people did listen to the president, enjoyed hearing him, and they liked what he had to say, and they enjoyed the visit. All right, thanks a lot, Tyler. Over to you, Kathy. The Lafitte Greenway. Now, some people are kind of confused when you say Lafitte Greenway. It's like, well, where exactly is it? And if you go by there, it's an area right behind what had been Mercy Hospital and Lindy Boggs. It's amazing because so much has sprung up.
So much has happened. Yeah, the Greenway actually is built around a 2.5-mile bike path that stretches from Tremé out through Mid-City up to the area that you're talking about. And much of the recent development has been in that Mid-City area. It has been kind of amazing. The Greenway opened about 4 years ago. The bike path, I guess I should say, because in some places it's quite narrow, and there's really not much there yet except the bike path. This is an old railroad right-of-way. And so down lower in the Tremé area, for instance, what they've done is develop some really nice playgrounds around that bike path, so there's more activity out there. And as you go out toward Mid-City, you're seeing more commercial development along the Greenway. It widens out, and it's kind of interesting that this green space is now attracting, it's become a great enough asset that it's attracting development on its perimeters. And you'll see in Mid-City, there's an apartment complex, 380 units, that has just begun to open. It's been developed in phases, and the first phase is opening now and taking in renters. And that's a lot of units in Mid-City. It's quite a development to come. There's also some townhouses nearby that are more on the luxury level. Along with those things, I think as those open, as they fill up with renters, you're going to see still more activity because they are attracted to the Greenway and the ability to bike downtown if they want to. There's also good public transportation. The bus line is, by Canal Street is easy to go downtown. So a lot of millennials, find that very appealing. In addition, commercial development, bars, restaurants, and whatnot is happening along the perimeters, and they like overlooking that area. There's a large new 5,000 square foot bar and restaurant called the Wrong Iron that has opened recently. And it's very nice. It's kind of stylish and a lot of outdoor seating, bike parking areas and that sort of thing. I think you're going to see a lot more of that.
One other thing that I would just add that I find interesting about that development is that if you look at the Greenway's history, it was a train, it was a train line. So a lot of the real estate that got developed around it was to serve the train lines.
Right.
So what you're seeing with a lot of this redevelopment is it's these old warehouses that are being brought back. And to see the developer's vision for a new use for a warehouse, one of them has a coffee shop in it right now. I don't think they've quite figured out what they're doing with the rest, but it's getting there. And even up to the top of the Greenway, there's a lot of warehouses up there that are starting to come back. And then the other thing I'd say is that wrought iron piece is also land that was owned by Sidney Torres. And he's got, and it was also the apartment building you referenced, and there's still a big piece right there, that he wants to do kind of a lifestyle center, which we don't really have here.
Yeah, he wants to model it on something in Dallas. I forget what the name of that is, but it's a similar thing. It's a greenway, biking, pedestrian, and so forth, and it's become extremely active with lots of commercial development.
Right
and pedestrians.
right at Carrollton in the bike trail, there's actually bike congestion at some time. I mean, because that's the head of it. There's a lot of space still to be developed. For all the wonderful things that are happening, there's still blighted things like the Lindy Bob's Hospital. So there's a whole lot of potential things to do.
That is a major piece, that Lindy Bob. The mid-city people really would like to see that thing redeveloped. That's been an eyesore for too long now.
And we really haven't heard of any firm redevelopment plans. It's been cleaned out from what I understand.
Yeah,
but we
the
don't
owners.
really know
I think
what's
the
going on.
owners want to do something. I think they're hampered by a number of things.
But the other thing that's making this possible are these blue bikes that are everywhere. And so it's possible for anybody to go and get a bike and just go and ride.
And go up and down the Greenway. But in terms of living, I mean, is there demand for all of these housing units?
I think there is. I think these are kind of mid-range as far as pricing is concerned. They're built for people who want to work in the area or downtown. The developers believe that the demand certainly is there. And I think some of the things that we've been talking about, the fact that there isn't enough housing downtown for a lot of workers.
There's even some demand among empty nesters who just don't
There
want
is,
to mow
that's
the lawn
true.
anymore, and they would like
Sure,
to have some
I mean,
that's
services
very
in the
true.
building.
And it's in a great part of town. It is very convenient. All right, Lafitte Greenway. Thanks a lot, Kathy. Errol, over to you. Pelicans. Whoa, what happened?
If you make a chart of this franchise's good luck and bad luck since it came here from Charlotte, the chart would look like the Rocky Mountains. It'd be up and down and up and down. And the downs have been really down, but the ups have been incredibly up. There's been twice. The NBA has this unusual system at the end of the season, a draft lottery. And like most leagues, the teams that do the worst get the first draft choice, and the better teams, are higher up there. So what they do is that they get the bottom bunch of teams, and then they have this elaborate ping pong ball system. And the worse you did, the more representation you have of the ping pong balls. The Pelicans were kind of like in the middle of the pack. And so they were seen as really being a long shot for I think it was a 6% possibility of their ping pong ball being the one that got their draft pick. And son of a gun, that ping pong ball worked its way through. Okay.
And now there's no doubt about who they're going to pick.
Yeah.
And I think this really rankles the rest of the league, because a few years ago the same thing happened when they got Anthony Davis. And so to have this kind of luck over a period of a few years, having your ping pong ball come and getting the first pick is just incredible luck. And so the theory, the number one college basketball player is a guy named Zion Williamson, who's a forward out of Duke. And so the speculation is that's who they're going to go after. Now, he doesn't have to. He could finish off his time in college, or he could say
He's only 18.
What?
He's only 18.
He's only 18.
Yeah. But his stepfather's already said, oh, no, he wants to come to New Orleans. He likes New Orleans. And so, that seems like a good possibility. And so there's a lot of excitement. I mean, the season's ended so badly for the Pelicans with all the rancor about Anthony Davis and the team not doing well. Now there's new excitement about this franchise, and with the changes that they've made in the front office. And so we hear these reports that people are calling up and buying tickets, and so the excitement begins again. But it's just incredible luck that this franchise has had. And there's this wonderful scene that night of the drawing that Alvin Gentry, who was rehired as coach, going around hugging everybody and just laughing and being so excited. I mean, this could have been the resurrection of his career.
They better make it work this time.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, good luck to the Pelicans. I mean, but that was not the official, that places them for first draft choice, right?
Right,
And
right.
when does the draft actually start, do you know?
I don't
early
know.
next
Next
month, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
So pretty soon. All right. Good luck to the Pelicans. Kathy, over to you. Tyler mentioned this about tax incentives. You are familiar with a recent study about that?
Yes, a study just came out. North Carolina State University released a study of 32 states and the tax incentives that they offer to companies, as job bait, I call it, to bring them into the state and to get them to create jobs and grow the economy. And this was based on some data by the Upjohn Center for Employment Research, I think it is. And they looked at the fiscal health of 32 states. They say that it represents about 90% of all the tax incentives offered in the country by various states. And they looked at the fiscal health of the state, and what they tried to do was to assess whether these incentives offered to companies to bring in jobs actually improved the fiscal health of the states themselves. And they conclude this is probably the most extensive research that's been done on this topic. It's a topic you hear in states all over the country because there's always the debate, is it worthwhile to put out these tax incentives and these tax breaks? Do we get enough in return for it? And so it's a very hard thing to evaluate. So this is a very important study, potentially. And their conclusion, essentially, was that it does not have much of an impact on the fiscal health of the states. And in some cases,
good or for bad?
And in some cases, it's adverse because they're spending way too much relative to the revenue that they're bringing in.
Louisiana, how did it factor
They
into
had
this?
two groups of states that they identified as being overly reliant on these kinds of incentives and as spending way more in relative to revenue than they should, and Louisiana was among those states.
I thought it was really interesting just to add, Amazon has come up in this a lot because they were looking with they
Right.
were looking to get huge, reap huge exemptions out of New York.
New York.
And when they went away, there were a whole bunch of people that said, good,
Right.
we shouldn't have given them the
That
exemptions
was
in
the
the first
most
place.
significant turnaround that we've seen, I think, in the whole economic development tax incentive business, is when Amazon
Right.
essentially got, they shrugged them off in New York and Long Island and said, okay, unless you want to come here without the tax incentives, forget it.
Well,
And
here in
so-
Louisiana, over the years, we saw a governor general who really supported those. What's the present governor's position?
Every single governor in Louisiana gives these money away, and
Right.
when you read a news story on it or watch the TV on the press conference, it's the headline and the focus is all the jobs that are going to be created. The governor taking credit for that. It's buried within the news story, and TV probably doesn't mention at all how much money that the government is giving
Put up,
away
yeah, to get
for these tax breaks. And I tell you, every single time John Bell Edwards comes to New Orleans in 2019 to campaign for re-election, he'll talk about the DXC technology and what a
Right.
great win that is. But he gave away a lot of money for that.
So it's something the state is still doing.
Absolutely.
I think
Every
the jobs
governor.
are an important
Yeah,
piece. I mean,
they are.
when we went through all the film tax
That's not to say it's all
limits,
bad.
the legislators around New Orleans were looking at their constituents who were like, what are you going to do? You take this stuff away and I'm going to lose my job. And that's a tough thing to deal with when you're
Wasn't
a
it similar to
legislator.
the arguments with the film industry?
Well, I think that's what he's saying, is that,
Right.
there are those arguments. But,
And
but I think-
and the film tax credit studies show that the state gives away something like $7 for every $1 in taxes that it recoups.
But when you look at those billion-dollar plants like the LNG plant in Cameron Parish and the petrochemical business all up and down the river, those are billion-dollar installations that got these very same tax breaks. And I think if you looked and asked the question, would they have come to Louisiana without those breaks, I think the answer would be an obvious yes, because they're coming here for much more important reasons than those tax breaks.
For the product and also location, et cetera. All righty, we got to go over to Kevin right now to do a wrap up on this discussion and also year one council. What's it look like for them?
So at the beginning of the council term, one of the Mitch Landrieu people that I was close with told me, I think you're going to be so busy covering this council that you're going to barely have any time to cover the mayor. That hasn't totally turned out to be true, but the council keeps you incredibly busy. So when I was coming on the show today, I sat down and started writing down a list, so I didn't want to make sure I missed anything. And the list, I was surprised at how long the list got. I mean, Sewage and Water Board oversight has been a huge one. The short-term rentals that passed yesterday has been huge. Both of those, I think, have really consumed the council's attention. Entergy, if you remember, at the beginning was one of the more controversial ones because they came into office and that wasn't really their thing. I mean, they didn't approve the energy plant, and then they had to clean up the paid actors mess. And then when they did clean it up and with a $5 million fine, a lot of people aren't happy with them. So, you know, when you're on council and you're trying to do a positive first year, I would say that one was a really tough one for them. A lot of enforcement stuff that they were eager to get, and that's always popular, I think, with constituents. Blighted pools. Let's get the trash cleaned up. You know, and the mayor went through with her clean up NOLA thing. Well, then the council now has a quality of life committee. So now if you can't get an answer in the mayor's office, then you can come and complain to council. Bike safety has been a huge one, and they increased the fines almost immediately without barely even putting it through committee for parking in bike lanes. Inclusionary zoning was a major affordable housing effort that they undertook that was not easy to do. And the homelessness issue continues to be a tough one for them. And that is one where you're starting to see some push and pull with the mayor that I don't think you've seen a lot during the first year. But if I had to make any predictions for the year ahead, I would say the council's going to start forging their own path away from the mayor on some issues and start being a little bit more vocal about what they're not happy about.
Also, we can't bypass the fact that New Orleans now is headed by 2 women.
That's right.
That's right. Helena Moreno is now president of the council, so the future is female, and she said, no, the future is now. So that's true. So how are they getting along, council and administration?
Well, I think behind the scenes, I think there's some complaints about communications issues. They feel like they get stuff at the last minute a lot of times. And then they sometimes feel like they don't get great information. And so what they've been doing on the homelessness issue, they went back and forth for like 5 months with the administration trying to get something done. And when they couldn't get it done, they just pushed through an ordinance that but look, the administration is the one who has to execute. So if you're going to put through an ordinance that tells the administration what they have to do, what happens if they just don't want to do it? And that's something where you could start looking at, and the mayor herself had this happen too. She did this Mow to Own program that she got through the council. Well, then they just didn't make any rules and the program was never implemented.
We'll keep looking at it. Thanks, Kev. Time to look ahead. Hey.
Okay, this June 6th will be the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And of course, it really resonates in New Orleans because of the important role with the Higgins boats, which are, well, the World War II Museum will be having a lot of activities, and including tours to France. This will be the summer of D-Day here.
Okie doke. Tyler.
Yeah, on Tuesday, Senate committee is going to take up the Harrah's casino extension bill, which was very controversial last year, less so this year, and I'll be continuing to follow that story for the Advocate.
All right. Kathy?
The first NBC bank fiasco, the closure, the failure of that bank and so forth, I think we'll hear more about what's going to happen with some of the executives involved. This past week, there was a lawsuit filed, a big investor lawsuit, contesting what went on at that bank before its failure.
All right. Kevin?
Tomorrow, 11 a.m., Louis Armstrong Park, the NOLA Soul and Arts Festival. Should be fun. I love the rich history of soul in New Orleans, and hopefully this will highlight that.
Oh, it does sound like fun. Thanks a lot, guys, for being here. Thank you all for joining us. And, of course, we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.